I switched it to my computer because it's a lot easier to mute. Okay, the time is now 6:06, and I'd like to call this meeting to order. The board members are participating via Zoom meeting. I'd like to welcome those who are watching the board meeting live streaming. We have Mr. Vickers, we have Mr. Frank Otero, we have Mr. Brian Baca, Mr. Elohidon, and Mr. Stephen Otero participating. I want to thank everybody that's watching the meeting via the live streaming. Mr. Baca, would you please announce the meeting?
Yes, sir. This meeting has been announced in accordance with the Open Meetings Resolution and is a legally constituted meeting of the Las Unas Schools Board of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Baca. Mr. Frank Otero, would you lead us in the pledge, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Otero. For approval of the agenda. Mr. Baca, are there any changes or deletions to the agenda?
Yes, sir. Board President Smith, members of the board, I would like to ask for the following modifications to the agenda. I would like that we please remove item number 11, discussion, review, and actions as needed regarding approval or rejection of school district organizational chart 2020-21 pursuant to Board of Education Policy 1.9.1, tabled on 1/21/20, 2/11 of 20, and removed from the agenda at 3/24 of 20.
Okay, I have a recommendation by Mr. Baca to remove item number 11, discussion, review, and action as needed regarding approval or rejection of school district organizational chart.
Excuse me, Mr. Smith, I do have a couple more.
Go ahead, Mr. Baca.
Okay, so I'd actually like to reverse the order of items number 9 and number 10 and ask that the rest of the agenda be renumbered as to reflect the changes. So we're going to reverse items 9 and 10. We asked that we removed 11, so we'll renumber the agenda according to those changes. Are you ready, sir?
Yes, sir.
For the new number 9, as far as the closed executive session, I would like the language to reflect the following changes, or I propose the language to reflect the following changes. The closed executive session is limited to personnel matters to discuss administrators and individuals for appointment as acting superintendent, including terms of a contract addendum or contract for employment for negotiations as permitted under sections 10-15-1 H2 of the Open Meetings Act, in which individual personnel information will be discussed, and discussion on personnel action to appoint acting superintendent and to discuss current status of superintendent.
Board members, anybody need that repeated?
No.
Everybody updated item number 9?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Baca. Is that all?
Yes, sir, that is.
Thank you. So I have a recommendation by Mr. Baca to reverse items number 9 and 10 on the agenda. And rather than me read my scribble, Mr. Baca, can you one more time read how item number 9 will read?
Yes, sir, Mr. Smith. Item number 9 for the closed executive session, the language will be limited personnel matters to discuss administrators and individuals for appointment as acting superintendent, including terms of a contract addendum or contract for employment for negotiations, as permitted under section 10-15-1 H2 of the Open Meetings Act, in which individual personnel information will be discussed, and discussion on personnel action to appoint acting superintendent and discuss current status of superintendent.
Thank you, Mr. Baca. And item number 9 and 10 will be reversed on the agenda. Item number 11 will be removed from the agenda. I'll stand for a motion.
So moved.
I have a motion by Mr. Stephen Otero. I'll stand for a second.
I'll second that.
I have a second by Mr. Vickers. Mr. Frank Otero, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. David Vickers, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Stephen Otero, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Hidon, how do you vote?
Yes.
And I vote yes. That brings us to item number 5. It's a discussion item for an update on the district's actions in light of COVID-19 pandemic in association with continuing guidance and directives from PED, State Health Department, and Governor's Office. I'll turn this over to Mr. Baca.
Thank you, Board President Smith, members of the board. The current COVID-19 update, the Los Angeles schools are continuing to feed our students at our 8 designated sites. We are feeding an average of 2,200 to 2,400 students daily. The Sanders has been hosting weekly administrative meetings for the purpose of disseminating information that were obtained through various sources, including the Department of Health, the New Mexico Secretary of Education, and the Governor's Office. We have been working with the, as far as the guidance and decisions for staffing and who's essential staff has been kind of decided at a site-based level as far as employees that are able to work at home or that are deemed as essential are being, those decisions are being made at the school sites. The Los Angeles schools continues to add content and resources as part of our continued efforts to provide academic support and instruction for our students and families. This content can be accessed via our homepage under the remote learning resources. Along with this action, the continuous learning plan, as required by PED, is due to the Public Ed Department later this week, and we'll have that ready for submission. Our families and our school sites and our departments have been working hard to get out the technology to our families who have identified or communicated that they need a device in order to access the curriculum. To this date, most of the curriculum has been sent out to the families. There are some families that continue to, that have not yet got their materials, and so we're working hard to get those devices into our families. There's also been the mobile hotspots, the Kajits that were discussed last time, as far as the mobile hotspots have been ordered. My understanding is they have been shipped. We haven't received them as of the time of this meeting, but we're told that we should be receiving them early this week, and our hope is to deploy those later in the week to the sites that haven't been identified where we have weak or no signal for our families. Along with that, there has been an email sent out from the superintendent and the technology department that has identified where our students and families can access our wireless hotspots at each school site and each building. So they've sent out that information and says where they can access our wireless internet, and it talks about where may be the best location as to access that for the strongest signal. The final activity that we have as far as updated is we want to first thank our law enforcement and our fire department partners. They have included the Los Angeles schools on their weekly meetings where they've been disseminating information. They've talked about the current state of both resources and practices and procedures for the different departments. They've also kind of listed us as one of their partners in responding to the COVID-19 spread. And so it's been a great help for us to be included in these conversations. I think one of the things that have communicated or have come about it is our need to basically help and share resources, whether it be the report on our personal protective device, or as far as how many cases are affecting us and what areas are being affected in our community. So that's what our update. Those are what we've been involved in since our last discussion. And I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Baca. Board members?
Yeah, I have a question. Are nurses,
Mr. Stephen Otero.
are nurses essential right now?
Mr. Otero, members of the board, President Smith, At this point, we do have our lead or charge nurse that is helping to disseminate information as far as any guidance that's coming down there. I know that she's working with special services, so she has been working with our different departments. The other nurses at our school sites, to my knowledge, have not been at their school sites. And so we do have Nurse Kelly or Jackie that is working on these informations, but our other nurses, to my knowledge, have not been at the school sites.
So follow-up question, is she like the director of nurses, or what's her position?
She's the head nurse or charge nurse for these things. So she's a person that we look for as far as for guidance and to help, with the other nurses.
And does she provide updates to you guys in reference to the health needs?
Yeah, my understanding is those have been communicated with the Special Service Department and Superintendent Sanders. I have not personally been involved in those updates that she has provided, but it's my understanding that they have been occurring weekly. But I myself have not participated directly in those conversations.
So I guess I just heard from one of our teachers earlier today that they're not getting any kind of emails in reference to, or from the nurses, I guess. And that's why I asked if there was a head nurse. Is she giving up updates to our district employees or to her parents? Is there a letter that she's sending out?
Yeah, Mr. Otero, members of the board. At this point, like I said, I haven't been participating directly in those activities, so I would have to get back to you as far as what resources she's sending out to our families. I do not personally have that information.
Okay. I think it'd be nice to have a newsletter from somebody that's in the medical field to our students, our teachers, our staff. Even I'd like to see an update, I don't know, as it changes for everyone. I mean, this thing gets changed every day almost. Just today, they reaffirmed that the governor has put a shutdown again on all businesses until April 30th. So, we're getting a lot of updates in the news, about now wearing masks, and I'd like to see what our recommendations are from our head nurse. And it'd be nice to see, like on our website, if she could put an update, from her to let everybody know that we have qualified people here that can give us some direction as well.
So it's my understanding that the people that kind of oversee that department are also either participating or viewing this meeting, and we'll make sure that we follow up with some of your suggestions, sir.
That'd be great. And I'd like to, as far as email, if it's posted on the website by her, I mean, we could check the website. Doesn't necessarily have to be an email to us, but that way everybody gets the same notice from her, let him know what's available as far as, the mask, what's available as far as testing within our community, how many COVID-19 cases we have within our district. They say 7 today in the county, but it doesn't necessarily say how many in Los Lunas, how many in Belen, or any other communities, even Bosque Farms. So it'd be nice to get those updates, and I'd like to see it from one of our professionals. I think that would be very impressive for our district to see that as well. So I appreciate your offer on that.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Stephen Otero. I think that's an excellent idea. I would like to also be included in whatever that email chain looks like. So,
Yes, sir.
any other board members?
Mr. President,
Mr. Hidon?
the last meeting, board member Dave Vickers brought up a great question, and I wrote it down. I'm going back to my notes. Hope I wrote it correctly. He was interested to know if we had any procedures in place. If we have a student or an employee that came down with a COVID-19, and how we were going to handle that. You said, Mr. Baca, you said you've been out of pocket with those kind of discussions, but if we can figure out where we're at with that, I think that was a great question the other day. And I don't know if it has been answered, but I haven't seen any.
Mr. Hidon, President Smith, I know as part of the weekly meetings that I've had with our local fire and our police, they have talked about the 7 cases. I think that they have not. I know that there's been questions that even our first responders and our police, is my understanding, that they don't know where these cases are identified within our community. I know that people are asking for those information. I don't know that any of them may have that information, but we'll try to look and determine as far as what would happen if we do have an identified case of a staff member. We will look into that for you.
Right, because, thank you, Mr. Hill and Mr. Baca, that was a good question, because we do have, out where we work, I mean, if there's a case of it, they evacuate the building and there's a procedure on the CDC's website on how to clean a facility, I guess. And I'm sure that we're doing something similar to that in this district, but maybe if we had something that was not necessarily a policy more as a procedure that says, look, if we determine that we had contamination in one of our facilities, we're immediately going to evacuate the building, we're going to cut it out, and we're going to put our resources out there to get it cleaned up in association with the CDC guidelines. And I think that would be the best way to approach it, and at least we have something written down.
Yes, sir. And I can tell you that to my knowledge, that there have not been any identified employees that with the Los Angeles schools that have come down with that. So
Excellent.
my knowledge, no one like that.
And I hope we don't, that's for sure. So, excellent. Any more questions?
One more follow-up.
Regarding my question, I believe that Ms. Sanders sent me an email stating exactly what the procedure is in that situation, and I thought she had emailed the whole board with that procedure. So they have a procedure in place if that should happen.
Okay. You had something else, Mr. Stephen?
Yeah, I've got one more thing, just kind of like a comment. So, Mr. Buck, are you guys communicating with Isleta tribal members? Because I passed today, I went through that cutoff of I-25 that goes directly to Isleta off of I-25. And it seemed to me that they had testing sites or tents just on the right-hand side. Do you know if the tribal government tribal people are conducting tests? And also, how many students do we have that are from Isleta, and are we keeping in touch with them as well?
Mr. Otero, President Smith. Now, as far as I know, that the weekly meetings that we've been having have been facilitated by Chief Culp of the Valencia County Fire Department. I know that there are representatives from each community. Everybody from Rio communities to Belen schools, to Bosque Farms, Peralta. At this point, I don't recall or having seen Isleta participate in those meetings. So I don't have any information and have not been in contact directly with the Pueblo Isleta regarding what you've asked for as far as testing or what they're doing for that. I do know that as far as the students with Isleta, just like with anything else that we send out through the superintendent's office and the different departments, they send out the mass emailing to all students that have a email address on the as part of their Power School student information system. And the other information that we're sending out there can also be accessed on our webpage. So I don't know that there's been direct conversation with Isleta. I know that the information has been disseminated, but we can definitely, that may be a question for next week to see when we have our next Monday meeting, to ask Chief Culp if we can maybe get Isleta on that call as well.
Well, I think you guys, the district, should take the lead on that and maybe communicate with the Lieutenant Governor just to see what they're doing. Maybe we can learn off of them, but it does look like they had a couple of tent sites that they had in place that look like they're doing testing. It'd be nice to know that we have somebody to go to in case we do need a test kit. And it seems like to me that the Pueblo might have those test kits. But yeah, being as a lot of our kids their kids are going to school in our district, and even though they're like half Valencia County, half Bernalillo County, I don't even think they're in Valencia County, I'm not quite sure. I think we should take the lead on that from the district's perspective to follow up on the kids that are coming to school here from Isleta.
Yes, sir.
Mr. President.
Yes, sir. Mr. Frank Otero.
Mr. President, members of the board, I also think that we should talk to the Public Health Office. I do know that the Belen Public Health Office is conducting sampling, and I think it's happening. I think it happened today, tomorrow, and the day after, what have you. But it's like everything else; they have to go through their their formula, if you want to call it, where they have fever and that type of stuff. And so I don't know what the capacity is over there. And here in Los Lunas, Valencia County, we've been off of school now, a month? And to me, I think it's paid off. Things have been kind of minimal here, and I really, hope that and pray that's the case here. We continue on that route. But I do also know that there's not a lot of there's nowhere like Mr. Stephen Otero had mentioned. There's nothing here locally, and so that all concerns all of us. But I just wanted to throw that in. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Otero. Any further comment?
One more comment.
Yes, sir. Mr. Stephen Otero.
Yes, sir, Brian. I want to say that in conversation with Albuquerque people, because I'm working in Albuquerque still, and other people, and hearing the news, and you see everybody scrambling to get electronics to teach their kids, and I want to tip my hat off. I don't wear a hat, but to you guys in the district and Ms. Sanders for being ahead of the game in our technology. It's kind of like impressive. One of the guys I worked with, his wife's been teaching at APS, and they have no communication going on, not to knock down APS, but build us up. And it's just impressive, because I tell them, our teachers have been teaching their kids for the last 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks, web-based. So way to go, congratulations. And I think it's pretty impressive that Las Lunas is ahead of the game in probably most of the districts. I heard that Bloomfield's trying to get electronic devices to their staff now. And it's kind of like a little late, school's almost to end officially in May. So it's pretty impressive. The Las Lunas schools is really, really ahead of the game.
Well, I think thank you, Mr. Otero. I think that the credit goes to the various departments as far as the technology, the curriculum department, special services, and our outstanding teachers and staff members at our school sites that have worked hard to communicate to the family, to identify those families that are in need of resources or access to the internet. So, in this crisis, there's wonderful opportunities for collaboration and teamwork. And I think that people district-wide have been really stepping up to the challenge, whether it be through the devices, whether it be to provide resources and curriculum. And those big thank you and show of appreciation to our nutrition staff that's been feeding all those kids. These guys are the ones that many times are the unsung heroes. These guys are going above and beyond to make sure that our kids are fed, to make sure that our kids have access to the curriculum. And so, that's one of those things that in an opportunity like this, these guys are doing a wonderful job for our community. So I want to personally thank everybody who's made this distance learning a reality, who's given out the devices, and especially who are feeding our kids. And another thing that's also taking place is that our staff that supports our counselors and our mental health staff have also been reaching out to families and checking on kids as well. So on top of the curricular needs, they're also touching base with these kids who they would normally check on a weekly basis to make sure that, see how they're dealing with the stress of this crisis, if you will. So everybody from the people that are preparing the meals and the people that are delivering the communication and the teachers that are in this and the assistants that are supporting the learning, it's a huge group effort. And I'll tell you what, it makes me proud as a community member and as an educator that our district is doing great things for our community and our kids. So thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Baca. I also have just a couple of comments about that too. And I did go to a couple of the sites where we're handing out the meals and stuff, and they do work very hard. And we're asking them to do a lot more than I think that they bargained for, more than they had realized. And the ones I talked to were full of life. They loved what they were doing. They talked to the kids as they came by. They talked to the parents. The smile on the kids' face when we're handing them meals is just something that I'm so glad that we are providing this service. I have some things that I'd like to see change, and we can discuss that at another time, but I think we're doing a heck of a job. And you're right, they're out there working, and we got custodians working, we got maintenance people working, we have our teachers working, we have everybody working, and the technology department is really working well. I'm really want to get these mobile hotspots up though, so we can make sure that we are reaching as close to 90% of our students in this district that we can. I remember the email that we got as far as the percentage of kids that have technology, and I'd like to see us push that number further to the right. But the technology department has done a wonderful job. And I thought about that this morning, Mr. Otero, Stephen Otero, just like you, I watched the Channel 7 story about APS scrambling to find devices and everything, the way they were working it out. And they have a great percentage of people that don't have devices in their school district. But I know that we got a head start. This technology department is really, really working well. But years ago, we got a head start from Miss Linda Jones, and I got to give her kudos, man, because she came to me one day and said, you know what, we need to get moving on this thing. And she did that, and we did. And our current technology department has just taken it over the roof. And we do a wonderful job for our kids and for our community. So I also want to thank all of those people that are continuing to work. Any more comments?
Yeah, just what you just said kind of reminded me, we can't forget our voters that voted for the bonds to bring in our technology. And if it wasn't for our voters to approve that money, we wouldn't be anywhere as close to where we're at. So by requesting this from way back when, it seems like every bond that we put out there has monies available or asking for monies for technology. So really, it starts with the community and the voters. So thank you, voters, as well.
And a big shout out to our SRO officers that are out there with our food sites as well. They're doing a terrific job. Any more comments on item number 5?
Mr. President?
Mr. Hidon?
Yes, Mr. President, members of the board. I've also visited a couple of the lunch sites, and I want to personally thank them. I thanked them. And you're right, Mr. Smith, they did it with smiles. They were happy to do that. We're asking them to do a lot. They did not sign up for this. I know we can't take any action tonight, but in the future, I'm going to ask you guys to figure a way how we could show some appreciation. I don't know how we will do that, but we'll do that as a group effort and figure that out. We're looking at our numbers. It's between 23 and 2,500 breakfasts and probably the same 23 to 2,500 lunches. I know we had a really robust meeting, the last one on last Tuesday, but we're going to get there together, all of us. I mean, like I said, we're all in this together and we'll get through this. Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Hidon.
So, if I may.
Any more?
Yes, sir. I just wanted, I did find out as far as the procedure, as far as the COVID-19, as far as identification, there was a document that was put out regarding the Safe School Supplement for COVID-19 protocols and information. March 16th, there was a document that was put together from the superintendent's office and many of the different departments that is answering some of the questions that were discussed earlier. I failed to mention that earlier, but there is the Safe Schools Supplement for COVID-19 protocols, and many of the questions that were discussed are addressed in that document.
Thank you, Mr. Baca.
Thank you, sir.
So for the benefit of the audience, the item was for discussion only. No action is needed or warranted. This brings us to items number 6, 7, and 8. Paragraph 5 of policy 2.9 allows for the Board of Education to waive the 3 readings of a policy prior to it being approved. Item 6 is a request that the board invoke its right to do so for the sole purpose of the consideration of policy 10.5, item number 7. If the approval of policy 10.5, infectious disease policy, and item number 8 is the request to reinstate the policy 2.9 in its entirety. That being said, I will stand for a motion on item number 6, approval to suspend policy 2.9.
Mr. President, I move to approve to suspend the policy 2.9.
I have a motion by Mr. Hidon to approve policy 2.9. I'll stand for a second.
I'll second that one.
I have a second by Mr. Stephen Otero. Mr. Frank Otero, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Vickers, how do you vote?
No.
Mr. Stephen Otero, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Hidon, how do you vote?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Motion passes 4-1. I'd stand for a motion regarding item number 7, approval of policy 10.5, infectious disease policy. Is Mr. Sanchez in the meeting? Ms. Karen Wolf, is Mr. Sanchez in the meeting?
Sir, he has not joined you yet. Do you want to try to reach him?
Yes, please. I'd like for Mr. Andy Sanchez to be on the meeting in case there's any questions regarding policy 10.5.
Let me try.
Thank you. Mr. Sanchez, can you hear me?
You should be joining you in just a second.
I can see him, I just can't hear him.
He's working on it.
Okay.
Mr. Giron, I can hear your hounds in the background.
That's not mine.
No?
No, it's my neighbor's.
Oh,
My neighbor's dog. I got 5 dogs and you can't hear them. Can you?
Oh, is that
You can't hear
right,
My
Frank?
neighbor's dog.
Can you hear us, Mr. Sanchez?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Sanchez, for joining us. We have went over item number 6. We have suspended policy, our policy 2.9, and we are currently in discussion of policy 10.5, the infectious disease policy. We've discussed this before, and rather than rehash everything, I was wondering if you could give us a brief overview as to what we're currently doing and what this policy does for us.
Okay. Well, the creation of the policy was fairly simple, is that when the initial closure of the schools happened, the governor had ordered that employees continue to be paid. There was an anti-donation issue potential to that. And while the PED said there really wasn't at that time an anti-donation issue, there really was problematic with regards to paying for services not rendered, which would be a problem under the anti-donation clause. So what was developed was basically a means by which the board could create a leave category. And in creating a leave category that had a justification that was similar to what the governor had wanted, which was the preservation of the workforce, and with regards to it being a case that they were kind of relying upon was a case where there was severance pay being given. So what we did was we actually tried to get close to complying with that case as we could, which was to provide a leave category that was part of the overall employee benefits compensation plan. And if it was part of that overall plan, it would not run afoul of the anti-donation clause. Also, a lot of it was going is that the alternative was that every employee had to be given alternative work assignments. And if by given alternative work assignments, they would be able to justify their salaries. However, some of the administrators, some of the superintendents across the state were saying that was creating an excessive administrative burden with regard to making sure that every employee had something to do, alternative assignments that day, and the administration that was required to ensure that was happening. So this policy was created. So what was basically happening, the policy creates a leave category in which an employee who does not have an alternative work assignment can be placed basically on administrative leave with pay. And that allowed us to do that so that they could still get assignments at home. They could still be called into work to do temporary assignments as needed depending on whether they were essential, non-essential, or they were filling in for an essential employee. So that's basically where the foundation of the policy is basically those sections and the standards like A through D, which is creating the leave category. So that if an employee is going to be designated non-essential, they could be placed in this category, a leave category, and be granted a benefit from the school district or from the Board of Education in a leave. So that's what the design of the policy was. The rest of the policy talks about things that the board maybe wish to consider, such as delegating a certain amount of procurement authority to the superintendent so that there doesn't need to be an excess number of board meetings. It talks about a lot of things that you guys do not need to have. For example, subsection H is not required. Anything probably through G is pretty much all that you need. Everything else was just basically stuff that we put in there to see if the board wanted to consider such provisions. You certainly can take them out if you do not want them. All that we ask is that you keep, with regards to having that ability, is to keep the leave category, which is the administrative leave with pay for employees who cannot be given alternative work assignments on a consistent basis. Because according to the most recent guidance from the PD, if they don't have an alternative work assignment, they used to have to use their paid leave. If they don't have any paid leave, they're essentially going to be laid off and placed on unemployment. This category allows you to avoid having those issues. They could be granted leave under your policy, which talks about that. It also has provisions on what to do with employees who are ill at work, who are essential. It also talks about giving the superintendent the ability to designate non-essential to be essential based on if essential workers are not available, so that we can maintain the current operations districts doing, such as food service and cleaning and maintaining, and also having the facilities open as the governor intended that all the facilities should remain open. So this is how that works. There's a lot of things in there that I think the administration could take a look and guide the board with regard to things that works well for your school district but may not or does not work well, and they can be eliminated or included in the policy. So there's nothing other than the leave category and the designation of essential, non-essential that are really required to solve the potential anti-donation issue. So the rest of it is you're basically looking at nice to haves, like employees making sure HR knows if they've changed their emergency contact information. We do that so that if the health authorities need to contact our employees, we can do that. There's just some things, but if you guys already have a system in place, you don't really need that. Facilities, it talks about the procurement. It talks about getting adequate supplies to make sure the work site is safe. Prepare training, procurement of equipment, whatever you need to do. But those are all, you guys could discuss them. If you don't want to include them, you can, or else you can make it a bare bones policy, which is the leave category. So that's basically how the policy was designed to operate, was to solve that initial problem, not to ease the administrative burden on your administration, as well as creating a means by which you could in fact pay employees who were reassigned home because of the need for social distancing and to preserve the workforce.
Thank you, Mr. Sanchez. So from what I understand, what we're doing now is if we have a non-essential employee and we send them home and assign them work, once we have exhausted work that employee can do from home, they are to take leave. And once they're out of leave, then they are to, I believe it was explained to me, file for unemployment. Mr. Baca, maybe you could answer that question. Is that what we currently do?
Yeah, so actually, Mr. Smith, I have not been directly involved with the development or review of this policy.
Oh, okay, that's fine.
Yeah, so I know that there was some discussion and clarification that was asked for last time with the board as far as this policy. I don't know if those have taken place or what has come out of that. So I don't know as far as if we are at that point where anyone's been placed on leave. There's been no one placed on leave. I know that they have been working on alternative assignments at home. I know that the principals are in the site, the department managers Administrators are kind of monitoring that. At this point in time, we have not got to a situation where somebody does not have work at home. But again, I haven't been directly involved in that, as maybe Ms. Sanders or one of, or the board on that activity.
Right. So, Mr. Sanchez, board members, any comments on this?
Mr. President?
Mr. Hinon?
Mr. President, this question is for our attorney, Mr. Sanchez. Mr. Sanchez, after reading this, the spirit of this policy is to give the superintendent a lot more latitude without needing direction from us. It'll be a lot simpler if this would ever happen again, or we can hit the ground running with this policy right now. That's the spirit of it. Am I correct?
Yes, it was to avoid the necessity for excessive meetings of the Board of Education to do immediate procurement, be able to designate and deviate from the employment policies that already exist so that you can do this. The policy for if you take a look at the policy in the introduction, it only becomes active if a state of a health emergency has been declared either by the governor or by local health authorities. You could have a epidemic or a pandemic or an epidemic that's locally, that just perhaps is in one or two of your schools. That would be the only time this stuff kicks in. If an employee is sick, they will already have our existing employment policies on sick leave, the leave bank. All of that will still be available to the employee. It doesn't deviate any of that. It is basically just to address this kind of unique situation.
Thank you, Mr. Sanchez.
So I have a question.
Mr. Stephen Otero?
Are other districts doing, that you know of, Mr. Sanchez, as you were explaining it to us?
Yes.
Are they following this?
Yes, a vast majority of all my clients have adopted some version of this. Some of them are bare bones, some of them expanded it, some of them just modified things that fit with what they do locally. So, like I said before, this came into existence by superintendents asking for some relief in the administrative burden of having to try to find and trying to keep track of every employee being given an assignment, and whether that assignment was sufficient enough to give a benefit to the school district to not run afoul of the state constitution.
So in your view, that you know of our district, are we all right as we are doing it right now, or are you recommending that we change it?
If you are in fact administering so that every employee has a substantive work assignment at home to do this, yes, you're in full compliance with the anti-donation. But that has to be maintained for every day, every employee that you're giving a salary to. They have to be given an assignment to be writing some benefit to the school district, and it has to be substantial. It can't be a trivial assignment.
So what wouldn't work this way is probably maintenance, custodians, SROs. I don't know, maybe some SRO, I don't know. There's certain job duties that wouldn't work with people going to try to work from home.
No, but most of your custodians and your SROs have been probably, with my understanding, has been designated essential, and they're actually called into work.
Right. So yeah, they couldn't go home and be assigned anything. I mean, so I guess our teachers are doing their job with their assignments.
Yes.
I know principals, if they go home, they can probably work from home, I think. I don't know if our district has the capability of call forwarding to someone to answer the calls. I know it's pretty much available everywhere. So if they worked from home, that would be assigned duties at home that they could conduct. Am I correct on that?
Yes, absolutely. And the PED also gave out in its guidance, gave a list of possible assignments that could be given to teachers and ancillary staff. The real issue, again, is the administrative burden for compliance with the law. You have to essentially every day have every employee who is not at the work site be given a substantial work assignment. And this policy alleviates a lot of that administrative burden because you're basically creating a leave category for their benefit.
And I believe I seen that in a report that our superintendent provided to her staff, that they would have to have assigned duties, and those assigned duties would have to be verified. So I don't think that we're doing anything wrong as far as that concerned.
No, right now, as long as every day, every employee's been given an assignment, you're in full compliance.
So when it comes down to the situation, and obviously this is gonna last for a very long time, when we run out of work for certain individuals to do from home is when this becomes an issue, as far as I read it, because then we start having them use their leave. And then when they're out of leave, then they have to file for unemployment. Is that correct?
Yes, because you can't pay anybody for not getting something in return under the state constitution.
And this policy will allow us to, once we've exhausted all the valuable work that our employees can do at home, we can actually put them on administrative leave and continue paying them.
Yes,
In a
because
nutshell, that's
the
what
the benefit would be part of the benefits and employment benefit salary compensation plan, which you can in fact do because you're preserving the workforce.
Thank you, Mr. Sanchez.
I guess I'm not confused, but I don't see that it being a problem within our district, because it seems like all the teachers and just like Mr. Bucket said earlier, that their caseworkers or the social workers are out there meeting with the families, or not meeting with them, but calling them and checking up on their kids. I can't see where any employee could fall into this category of having to put an administrative leave, because it seems like the teachers are teaching, principals are doing their job. It seems like things are going pretty good, I would think. But what I'm saying, I guess if principals need to work from home, I'm sure they can work from home. Or the secretaries have to work from home, I'm sure they can work from home. And I don't think they'd ever run out of anything to do, because they just gotta get online and do what they have to do with what's before them. So I really don't see us, the district, having a problem right now.
But I don't see an immediate need either, and that's why it wasn't, it was provided so that there could be some time to work with the administration on what works best with it. However, like I said before, if there's going to be a lifting of the administrative burden and also make sure you protect your employees, it is certainly nice to have the policy available. I mean, it's belts and suspenders, but it's there.
And I agree with what you both have said so far. We are in a good place right now. What I'm worried about is when we get to the place where we're not in a good place and we have run out of things for people to do. That's when this policy becomes, in my opinion, something that we seriously need to consider. And I did read through the whole thing, and there is some things that probably don't need to be. So, go ahead, Mr. Otero.
Mr. President, that's leading up to my question is, what's the length on the terms and stuff like that? I mean, here again, we're on uncharted territories and we don't know how long this is going to last, but, we're looking right now on the short term, and that's the end of this school year, but what happens if it goes deep into next school year?
Frank, nobody wants to attack that one.
No, Mr. Sanchez.
Well, we have to consider it. I mean, nobody ever considered this was going to happen.
I agree that we have to consider it. I'm just acting under the impression that we have already budgeted to pay these people. And it's not my fault. It's nobody's fault that this thing happened to this school district, and we're trying to make the best of it. And we want to make sure that we take care of those who have taken care of us for so long. And I agree, Mr. Otero, that's a tremendous question. What happens if we're going into next year? We may go into next year. We don't know what we're going to have to do. But as far as I remember reading this policy and discussing it with you, Mr. Sanchez, is it would at least cover until the end of the contract. Is that not correct?
Yes. I mean, none of the employment changes for our employees. They're still under contract. The administration and superintendent will still have to do letters of intent to rehire and everything else that we go to at the end of the year, so we can go into next year. So it doesn't change any of that stuff. And again, it's only active during a state of an emergency, health emergency. and it's only available during those times when there is a closure of schools. So, yeah, if the board chooses, you can continue to go doing what you're doing now. But again, like I said before, it won't change what you're doing now, but it allows you that when there is not substantial work available, the administration the superintendent does have the option to use the policy.
Which is to keep the employees paid.
Yes.
Like Frank says, I mean, we don't know, uncharted as he says, but at this point, I'm just hoping and confident that things are going to get back to normal before the new school year. I know a lot of organizations and big events are being canceled, even events that are in July and August, because of the plain fact is that they need to advertise, they need to do their pamphlets, just like the election. The election, now they're talking about mail ballots. They can't count on nothing or everything getting a lot better. So they got to set a plan in place because they can't come in too late and change it. So if we have in our district some pamphlets and some booklets and anything else that has to be published, that's going to be a problem for us.
Yeah,
Mr. President?
I wasn't looking.
Mr. President?
Mr. Hidon.
Mr. Frank Otero, that was a great question, and I want to make sure I'm clear on this, this question is going to be for Mr. Sanchez again. This can only be implemented if the governor or I think it was, or the secretary of the public of the PED implements something like this. So we're not bound to it unless they implement this kind of emergency again. Is that correct?
Yes, it's very limited, and it's very limited in its applications. There has to be some sort of epidemic or infectious disease pandemic for you guys to be able to delegate the authority you're doing and create the leave category.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Sanchez. That was a good question, Mr. Otero. Thank you.
So basically, did you have something, Mr. Otero?
No, that's the hound next door.
Oh, does the hound have anything to add? So basically,
I'm serious, it's that hound setting me up.
So basically, if we keep going like we are right now and we find substantial work for our employees, we're fine. But if we extend this out, not us, if it gets extended out by things that are beyond our control, it's more of a safety net to when we get to that point, correct? Because if we do it the way we're doing it right now, and I'm not saying we're going to run out of substantial work, but if we did and we put people on unemployment, we have to rehire them back? Do they use up all their leave and then we rehire them back with no leave? I don't know how that works.
Yeah, Mr. President, members of the board. I know one of the, as of right now, that we've had different categories, whether it be teachers, whether it be classroom assistants, whether it be child-specific assistants that have been working with the participating teachers or reaching out there. At this point, we haven't had a shortage of work. And the fact is and those are being tracked at from the school sites. Also from the different departments here, as far as people are doing some of their training that can be done, online and other activities associated with their departments. One of the other things is that from the time that this policy was presented on the 24th, I don't know if anything has been amended, and that's one of the. This is a 6-page document, and as Mr. Sanchez said earlier, that really the requirements are limited as far as to like letter H or something like that was what he said. And so the one thing about it is this is a 6-page policy, and I don't know if there's been any revisions, if there's been anyone else to review different components of that, because I don't know that districts haven't adopted it in its entirety. Some people have adopted small portions of it. So I just don't know that, as far as with the whole policy, if they're, if they make sense as to how it will be implemented. And I think that's, the 6 pages in its entirety, I understand what's outlined here. But as Mr. Sanchez said, is that there's only limited items that are basically required to meet the anti-donation challenge there. So I don't know as far as with the policy. As I said before, I haven't been involved in the revision or the presentation of this policy, but in reading through it, you know, I'm not sure that every part of that may be appropriate, because at this point in time, as of today, on Monday, we haven't come to that need yet. But as you said, I don't know if we will, but I think that, you know, I don't know if there's any changes that have been made since it was initially provided to the school board.
Mr. Smith?
Mr. Vickers?
As was mentioned, Mr. Sanchez did say that other districts have adopted the policy in part, various pieces of it that apply to their districts. And Mr. Brian Baca is correct that it's 6 pages, and there's a lot of stuff in there. And I identified 2 paragraphs that look like they deal with the anti-donation issue, and that's paragraphs J and K. And you could almost just adopt those 2 short paragraphs to deal with that issue. It gives the superintendent an option and authorizes them to put people on administrative leave for the purpose of preserving the workforce if they don't have any meaningful work to do. But what I would like to know is, if we pass this policy now, could it be brought up again at the following meeting for revision?
Absolutely.
Because I think it needs a lot of revision.
So it does, and we've had this policy for quite some time. And I agree, and I'm glad that you read through it and you find those ones there. I agree with 2 of the ones you have, and then I have some other ones that needed to be added. I think that the superintendent being able to designate other personnel that were previously in the non-essential category to the essential category based on need, because if we had some other people sick, also needs to be a portion of this document. I agree with you though, and I agree with Mr. Sanchez. There's a lot of things in here that probably don't apply. And the parts that do apply, I hope that we never need. But they're nice to haves in case that we do. So we've had this policy for quite some time. So I would like to I don't want to go over every single one of the bullets or anything else like this, but I would like to see if everybody can possibly read this, understand it, see what type of relevance it has to our district in any shape or fashion that you think would benefit the staff in this district and our overall community by reading this document and see which of it applies. And obviously, it's one of those things that we don't ever want to happen. But with the way this thing is going, it might. So that's the thing that I think that we have to think of. But you're right, Mr. Vickers, in your question. If we could amend it later if we wanted to, we could do some homework and make suggestions as to how it should read, as long as we're adopting the key parts that deal with the anti-donation. I meant there's various ways we can do this. So that dog is really loud.
Okay, so
I'm telling you.
I would be willing to go ahead and accept the policy as long as we can just say, put it on the next meeting's agenda, and I can work up a suggested amendments to it myself, and if everybody else wants to do that, to trim it down and just get it to the essential things that we need to stay out of trouble with the anti-donation clause.
So is there any more discussion?
Mr. Smith, members of the board, I know that we have a regular scheduled meeting. Is that April 21st? Is that our next regular schedule?
It is, that I have.
Okay. You know, and again, as far as if we're going to adopt a policy and then later make changes on April 21st, as I said before, I don't foresee that between now and April 21st that we would have people running out of work, and that we would need the need to implement this policy immediately. We have no intention or have the need to put anybody on as far as administrative leave or to enact this policy between now and the 21st meeting. So, I mean, at this point, we haven't. We've had plenty of work. People have been very creative. We've had, as far as educational assistants that are doing videos for their students. They're helping out with the teachers, even being another set of eyes when they do their Zoom meetings and all these other meetings. And so, you know, at this point, I mean, as I said before, if this policy is going to be basically whittled down on the 21st, you know, as I said before, I don't see us needing or having to enact this before the 21st to protect people's jobs or to stay in violation or to keep from violating the open or the anti-donation clause. So that's my thought about it, that we do have a board meeting on the 21st. And if changes or anything is, you know, because one of the things they talked about, or you guys, there was discussion, and again, I wasn't running the meeting, but I was listening to it, was that even the need that, as they're looking at policies with the John Kennedy, that we even have someone else take another set of eyes to make sure that we take the parts that are specific to our district as well. So I know those are things that were brought up in the last meeting, about the different policies and procedures under Section 7. And those are the board is continuing to work on those policies. So that's what was there. But again, that's my thought on this policy as far as right now.
Thank you, Mr. Baca. So, Mr. Vickers, I agree with what you were saying, and as of right now, we do look good. But who knows what this thing is going to do and what it's going to do to our community and our people. And I agree with what you had said. We can trim this down if we needed to do that. I, for one, don't want to take a chance that we don't need it. And if we don't need it, no harm, no foul. But at least it's in place in case that we do. That's my take on this.
Mr. President,
Mr. Hiron.
Mr. President, Mr. Baca, I respect your recommendation. We addressed this March the 24th. We tabled it then. I remember Mr. Frank Otero, I think, brought it up and says we need to revisit this as soon as possible. And I've gone over this list. It's pretty robust. The one item that Mr. Sanchez says to delete, I thought it was a good one and leave it in there, but I'm just one. This times that we're in right now change daily. So in a form of a motion, I'm going to ask to instate, I've got to make sure what it's called here.
What's that?
Let's hold on. I would like to make a motion to implement policy 10.5, infectious disease policy. That's in form of a motion, Mr. Smith.
I have
We
a
can come
motion
back
by Mr. Hidon.
and trim it up, and it's a living document, but I
Right.
want to go ahead and get this enacted.
I have a motion by Mr. Hidon to approve item number 7, 10.5 infectious disease policy. I'll stand for a second.
I'll second that motion.
I have a second by Mr. Stephen Otero. Mr. Frank Otero, how do you vote?
We have
Let's have
Mr.
some
Smith?
discussion.
Sure,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
So
Okay.
if
Mr.
we
Frank Otero.
pass this policy today, can I request that it be back on the agenda the next meeting for revision, for suggested revisions, amendments?
Yes. We will have it on the next agenda for suggested revisions.
I think I'd be more comfortable if it comes back as a motion to say we accept it today and, you know, that we put it back on the, does it have to be that way or not?
Mr. Sanchez?
Mr. Heron wants to modify his motion, he can do that.
Mr. Hidon, do you care to modify your motion?
Yes, I withdraw my motion to instate policy 10.5, infectious disease policy. My new motion will be to make a motion to accept policy 10.5, the infectious disease policy as is, and we will revisit this, and it's a living document. We'll go through it, add stuff, and delete as we go through it. And I heard we're going to have an April 21st meeting.
Correct.
Is that correct, Mr.
That is
Baca?
the next scheduled.
That is.
Yes. And Mr. Vickers, I do respect that we can move stuff in and out of there.
So I have a motion by Mr. Hidon to approve item number 7, approval of policy 10.5, infectious disease policy, and have it stated on the following board meeting agenda as a discussion item. Is that correct?
Yeah,
Well,
You know, and be modified, and can be modified.
allowing for more than discussion, modification.
Correct. It could be modified after discussion. Is that correct, Andy Sanchez?
Yes.
Mr. President,
Mr. Frank Otero?
okay, well, I'm the one that's pushing to do it as soon as possible, but I'm a little bit, I'm a little bit concerned about, what I did hear from Mr. Baca, that a lot of what our concerns would be within with the parameters of state law, currently right now. And I definitely want to vote for it, but I'm kind of wondering why we would vote some things that we don't want in there and have to modify it in the next meeting. So, if I get some clarification from Mr. Sanchez or Mr. Smith, I guess to push me over the edge on either way, but, where would be the benefit either one?
Yes, sir. Mr. Frank Otero. So the reason, what I'm saying is it's going to be in place. And if we don't need it, then there's no foul. But if we do need it, if this thing just balloons and gets crazy, we'll have it in place. That's my only thing. I don't know what's going to happen between now and April 21st. But there are obviously some things in here that will probably never take effect, but they will be in place should they need to take effect. And I think it's very, very important that we have this safety net for our employees when, if things get really, really bad here, we're not asking them to go on unemployment. We are going to put them on administrative leave and give them a paycheck. That's why I'm interested in getting it done as soon as possible. And I agree 100% with Mr. Vicker.
Right.
We need to go read this document. We need to see what pertains to us, and we need to see what doesn't pertain to us. We need to communicate with each other at the next board meeting and trim it to something that we all agree on as a something that's going to permanently be in our policy folder. But I think that it can be done both ways. So that's
Yeah.
my reason for pressuring.
I'm fine with that. I'm fine with that. These are, like we said earlier, these are just unusual times, and we just have to do things kind of in different fashion, but I'm with you on it.
Any more discussion? So I have a motion.
Mr. Smith, members of the board, under this discussion, the reason I want to do this, and I've read this a couple of times. One of the things Mr. Sanchez wanted to delete, I thought it was something good, but that's just me again. The spirit of this is, we're in tough times right now. We need to pay our employees. We need to give our employees some assurances right now. And that's the spirit of this. So in 2 weeks, we'll come back on the 21st and we can butcher and go through some of this stuff or add things to it. I respect you on that, Mr. Vickers, on what you want to do with this. And I thank you for that. So I just want to make sure we're paying our employees and we give them assurances that we're behind them.
Thank you, Mr. Giron. So I still have a motion on the table by Mr. Giron to approve item number 7, approval of policy 10.5, infectious disease policy, and have it appear on the next scheduled board agenda for discussion and modification.
And I second that motion.
I will have a second by Mr. Stephen Otero. Any more discussion? Mr. Frank Otero, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Vickers, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Stephen Otero, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Giron, how do you vote?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Motion passes 5-0. That will bring us to item number 8, approval to reinstate policy 2.9, policies of the Board of Education. I'll stand for a motion regarding item number 8.
I move to reinstate the policy.
I have a motion by Mr. Giron to reinstate policy 2.9. I'll stand for a second.
I'll second that.
I have a second by Mr. Stephen Otero. Mr. Frank Otero, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Vickers, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Stephen Otero, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Giron, how do you vote?
Yes.
And I vote yes. That brings us to item number 9, closed executive session. Closed executive session for limited personnel matters to discuss administrators and individuals for appointment as acting superintendent, including terms of contract addendum or contract for employment for negotiations as permitted under section 10-15-1H2 of the Open Meetings Act, and discussion on personnel action to appoint acting superintendent and discuss current status of superintendent. I stand for a motion on item number 9 for the board to go into closed executive session.
So moved.
I have a motion by Mr. Stephen Otero for the board to go in closed executive session. I'll stand for a second.
Second it.
I have a second by Mr. Hiron. Mr. Frank Otero, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Vickers, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Stephen Otero, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Hiron, how do you vote?
Yes.
And I vote yes. The board is in executive session at 7:16. Thank you, Mr. Sanchez.
Thank you.
Board members, make sure you disconnect from this Zoom meeting. Okay, I'd stand for a motion to go back into regular session.
So moved.
I have a motion by Mr. Stephen Otero to go back into regular session. I'll stand for a second.
Second.
I have a second by Mr. Hidon. Mr. Frank Otero, how do you vote? You're muted, Frank.
Yes.
Mr. Vickers, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Stephen Otero, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Hidon, how do you vote?
Yes.
And I vote yes. The board is back in regular session at 8:05. The board went into closed executive session for discussion regarding limited personnel matters, specifically discussion of administrators and individuals for appointment as acting superintendent, including terms of a contract addendum or contract for employment, for negotiations and discussions on personnel action to appoint acting superintendent and discuss current status of superintendent pursuant to 10-15-1H2 NMSA 1978. No other topics were discussed and no action was taken in closed executive session. It brings us to item number 10, appointment of acting superintendent pending successful negotiations of a contract for employment as negotiated by the board president and the board vice president for approval and ratification by the entire board at this meeting. I stand for a motion on item number 10.
I move, Mr. President.
Mr. Hidon?
I move that we take action with your direction.
Thank you, Mr. Hidon. Does somebody want to make a motion involving an action item?
Is this the motion that you're asking for to recommend
I am.
interim superintendent?
I am.
I make a motion that, based on our discussion, that the interim superintendent will be Walt Gibson.
I have a motion by Mr. Stephen Otero that the interim superintendent will be Mr. Walt Gibson. I will stand for a second.
I will second it.
I have a second by Mr. Hidon. Mr. Frank Otero, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Vickers, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Stephen Otero, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Hidon, how do you vote?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Motion passes. That brings us to item number 11, announcement of meetings. As allowed by the Open Meeting Act and District Open Meetings Resolution, on occasion a quorum of board members attend the same function, including those held at school sites, at the district level, as well as sports functions, conferences, workshops, and trainings. Board members will refrain from discussing and/or acting on board issues in those settings. In addition, only official meetings are published, and if other meetings are scheduled, they will be announced in accordance with the Open Meetings Act. I'd like to announce the following meetings. On April 7th, there is a board work session via Zoom, budget overview and board priorities for budget 2020-21 fiscal year. Quorum will be in attendance. On April 14th, there's a finance committee meeting via Zoom at 4 o'clock. On April 14th, there's a budget presentation via Zoom at 6 p.m. Budget presentation for parent advisories, NEA Los Lunas, and community. Quorum may be in attendance. On April 21st, there's a regular board meeting at 6 p.m. via Zoom, only one regular meeting in April, and board work session on April 28th at 5 p.m. via Zoom for the final board input on budget 2020-21 FY. Quorum will be in attendance. This brings us to item number 12, adjournment. I will stand for a motion on adjournment.
One more item, Mr. President.
Mr. Otero?
I hope we didn't leave the public wondering what exactly we did in reference to bringing Mr. Walt Gibson in. I don't know if that should have to be expressed as to why we're bringing Mr. Walt Gibson in or not.
If you would like, I could call the legal counsel. Miss Sanders is on leave, on medical leave for a period of 30 days based on the note that we got. And we are providing a acting superintendent to come in and fill the position until it is deemed necessary that Miss Sanders is deemed fit for duty to return back to her position. Miss Sanders is not on administrative leave.
And just to confirm, that's leave requested by her.
This is correct.
I just thought it's fair for the public to know what's going on.
Fair
so
enough. Thank you, Mr.
just
Otero.
leave that out there, so.
Fair
I
enough. Good-
apologize for going off the meeting.
Fair enough. Good point. Any other concerns? No comments? I'll stand for a motion on adjournment.
So moved.
I have a motion by Mr. Stephen Otero to adjourn. I'll stand for a second.
Second.
Second,
I have a second by Mr. Vickers. Mr. Frank Otero, how do you vote?
yes.
Mr. Vickers, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Stephen Otero, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Hidon, how do you vote?
Yes.
And I vote yes. The meeting is adjourned at 8:10.